Howdy, all you delicious people. I'm here today to review Captain America Civil War. This probably is going to possibly bleep. That's all, folks. No. This movie is gonna quite possibly be the most complicated movie that I have ever reviewed. As far as Marvel terms goes, because good God, going into this movie, I thought like Guardians of the Galaxy was a complex thing. Plus, with Guardians of the Galaxy, I don't think I was heavily all that detailed within that review. I thought Thor: The Dark complicated movie, but like after watching this movie, I'm like, oh my god, like Thor: The Dark World seems simple compared to this. But I feel also kind of under the gun to need to actually push this out there just because of what is going on in the MCU world recently. And if you get my drift, you'll know exactly what I mean. But yeah, there's a lot of stuff to unpack in this movie. Good God, is there like, there's two new characters that are in the MCU. There's like a ton of just you go into approaching like numerous deaths that happen in this film. On top of that, you have to like there's so many events that are connecting to not only just Captain America but like everyone in this film. Like we have like Tony who suffers a pretty damaging loss in this film, and we also have a guy that we saw this one to really just not really be here all that long. But yeah, so really also this is to still be a prequel, if not also Captain America: The Winter Soldier, which I will have probably put out before this one. This movie is to also be a prerequisite, of course, for Falcon and the Winter Soldier because we have Zemo in this movie. And so, yeah, like, so that breaks down all of that for the most point. So, yeah, this is a really just, it is a fun movie. Even though, man, I also, like, I can have this really back and forth kind of debate about this movie on whether this movie is good enough or good at all. Uh, like to me, I would say that there's way too much going on in this film. Like, God, is it just like an exhausting movie to watch because there's too much to cover, there's too much to go into, and I feel like it's going to take me 4 hours to review this, just because there's too much going on in this film. And it's only like 2 hours and 30 minutes, and I feel like I'm going to be going into like 12 years and 45 seconds and like trying to review all this film and try to get everything as good as I can. So hopefully I'll kind of like let everybody know exactly how this film goes because it's gonna be difficult. So, if anything, yeah, like there's like to even talk about this movie in a cryptic like sense is very hard. Like the severely condensed down version of this movie would to have said that for Captain America Civil War, the main objective of this film is to make the superheroes realize that there are people, there are buildings, and there are uh, things that they have completely annihilated while being Avengers, and how they need to start realizing that they need to minimize the collateral damage of things, or otherwise they're just going to get arrested. Otherwise, they're just going to like be not only murdering or shooting down or killing or whatever any number of villains that they're going to have to, but they also will be killing a number of innocent bystanders in the way of just crushing, killing whichever whole entire town of people or whichever. But yeah, like this movie is like wow, like I love the intelligence of it just because it's like finally like I think when we went into Avengers, like a lot of people were making the joke of like the Avengers, like the team that destroys everything, like wipes everything out. To where finally in Captain America: Civil War, they finally address that. They probably quickly forget about it because there's too many like gigantic, colossal like threats. But here's the thing, like I don't think it ever actually gets readdressed. Like uh like I think really like after like Endgame, we should have immediately just start to readdress what is all going on. Like we really should have reassessed how things are to still be done, or reasonably like kind of why the whole thing with the Sokovia Accords like just didn't work out, or whichever and what have you. I guess I think a lot of people just pushed it under the rug because they're like, these heroes are gonna do whatever they want regardless, and like there's no stopping them. And so really like if anything, don't tick them off because one day we're going to need them and they're not going to want to be there. So yeah, so technically I guess with the Thanos stuff that kind of proved that yeah, uh like these guys do know what they're doing, and also like these guys are going to consistently save our world, so cut them some freaking slack. So with that said, I think that's all that I want to say about this movie in a very cryptic like sense, because there's a lot more to say in spoiler like sense. So, with that said, I am going to go into spoilers of this movie. More than likely, more than any other film. Like, there'd be often times where quite often you would see me go into notes. Like every once in a while, I'd be looking down at something, or I'd be looking up at something. This time, probably more than movies in the past, I probably will be doing that more often. Just because there's a lot. Like, it seems like this movie is the most impossible movie to find the right scene that you had, like, gone into for this film. Like, hey, man, like, what scene, like, did you last watch when you watched this last? Oh, yeah, like, I went into the spot where so and so person is at this one like grave of so and so person. Oh, okay, let's fast forward to that part. It'd be like, okay, well here's like 12 different people fight or like uh let's go back. Let's go back for a second. Like cuz anyways, like hey man, what was the one scene that you yeah, like I came in as Black Panther was fighting Bucky. Like, oh, okay, great. So let's fast forward to that part and be like, there? Like, close enough, I guess. Like, if anything, like, Ant Man is fighting, like, Natasha there, and, like, I guess it goes into there. Like, so, like, you're having to, like, just, like, start at certain fight scenes and just kind of make it to the part where you, like, got to where, like, you remember it being or whichever. Like, this movie seems impossible if you ever, like, paused it and then you had to go somewhere else and then try to like re-catch up with someplace else, or really it's just like man, if you just hit a button wrong and all of a sudden you're fast, like I was so scared to like not touch anything of my like screen while this movie was to go on, because I was thinking I'm like man, I'm gonna accidentally hit something and all of a sudden it's gonna fast track me to some scene, and I'm like, oh crap, now I have to go back a certain moment, and then I'm like, yeah, that's not gonna work. Now I have to rewatch a whole entire scene to get me to the one thing that I need to get to. So, but that's the funny thing about Captain America: Civil War, but it's also the annoying thing. So, let's get into this. Let's go out of our way to say that, like, I have this back and forth kind of feeling of Captain America: Civil War. I could probably watch this and say that I honestly did not like this film. Um, but there are some fun elements in it. There are some good parts of story that I could enjoy that came out of this. But overall, like, I could say that I probably didn't overall like this movie, but I could say that there's parts of it that I do like. And more than likely, that will be something that makes this movie a rewatchable film. Is it just like, yeah, I don't really like this film, but more than likely, if I go into it, I probably won't remember it the next time around when I'm to watch this. So, like, oh yeah, there is like, because I remember nothing about this film when I went back and watching it. I'm like, oh yeah, like this person does do this in this movie. Oh yeah, like I didn't remember a lick about this film. I do remember like everything that was to happen like while I was watching the film. Like there was maybe some like obvious new characters that I knew were coming here, and I knew like things that happened to certain characters, but over other than that, like I was drawing a complete blank for this movie, so it was kind of interesting to watch this because out of probably all the other Marvel movies, this one was probably just the I don't remember much at all of this film. So let's get into the Double Five time territory because it's that coveted time yet again to go into spoiler time. Spoiler time, it's about that time to spoil this movie. So, in the very beginning of this movie, we are, I believe, in Serbia in 1991. So the people of Serbia are to have this thing called a Red Book, and they are to be watching over Bucky, who is to, of course, this is to be like the Winter Soldier project. They are to, of course, be brainwashing him, and then they are to like say these magically delicious words that are to force Bucky to bend to their will. Weirdly enough, like they didn't have that in the Winter Soldier where they are to say any of these words. Bizarrely, I guess they just had to retcon or change that in this movie. Plus, also, here's the goofy thing. If they are to mind control Bucky, why did they also wipe his brain? Like, if they could control Bucky, why did they have to brainwash him to forget who he was? Would like Bucky's willpower just overpower uh the mind control of it? Like, I'm just a little confused. But anyways, so the scene or the mission that Bucky is to have to do is to have to kill people and then abstract a briefcase that is to have, I guess, vials of super soldier serum. So, Bucky is to go and kill people in this car, and then he is to take this briefcase out of it, I guess, of super soldier serums. I guess there's a couple of cases of that. So, fast tracking into now, like, because we just have to quickly transition here. You're going to hear that a lot from here of me having to quickly transition through a lot of freaking things. So, next up, Lagos, Nigeria. So, we have the what I would call Captain America Avengers, because reasonably uh, we have Captain, we have Wanda, we have Sam, we have God, am I forgetting somebody? Uh, Yeah, that sounds like it. Well, like that sounds to be the only people that are probably going to be important for this mission. So immediately, uh, what is to happen here is Cap, since it seems that Wanda is kind of like the freshest recruit. Cap is consistently asking Wanda like what she is to see, and so like Wanda has these like goofy answers, and like basically like Cap is to ask Wanda about some Range Rover that's down the street, and like Wanda's like, "Oh yeah, that Range Rover, it's really cute," and Natasha is just like, "Yeah, and it's bulletproof." Like evidently, like you're not very observant. So uh, eventually, uh, we eventually have Cap notice a garbage truck that is to seemingly be very suspicious, and so Cap is demanding that Sam is to take his Red Wing, his little bird that he is to detach from his body, and to go and try to tag this thing, to tag and check this garbage truck. So so Falcon is to send Red Wing to kind of just scan through this vehicle, and they find out that there is seemingly a lot of military forces that are within this garbage truck. And so also it seems that this garbage truck is going to be sent in as some battering ram to go into this building. So we find out that seemingly uh, Captain America has wanted to desperately find Rumlow, who, of course, a lot of people might remember him from the strike team, from, of course, Winter Soldier. In this movie, he is to be Crossbones, which, of course, is like this, like, I don't like this variation of Crossbones. Like, they kind of really, like, quickly forget about the whole like design of Crossbones, and he just looks just awful straight up. Like he just looks like a garbage like approach of this character, and plus also like all they care about is this guy was Rumlow from the other movie, and so really they don't even call him Crossbones in this film, which is just a huge freaking letdown in all honesty. That like Crossbones, when we finally get him in a movie, doesn't even look cool, and plus also doesn't really last all that long in this movie either. So, but uh, so Crossbones and his men are to arrive at the IFID building because there's a lot of logos that are to say on this building that is to be called the IFID building. So, so if anyways Falcon is to fly in Cap and drop him off, and so Rumlow is to go inside this building and collect this biohazard like material, and we are not exactly all well and known exactly what this is, but Cap is to go into this building. And he is to tell Wanda to try to magically get all of the gas that is in this building out of the building uh, by using her magic. So eventually, Wanda is to eventually get all the gas out of this building. And so the first up to go up against Crossbones is actually Widow. And so eventually that leads to eventually like Widow trying to electrify like Crossbones, and Crossbones telling Widow it's like, dude, that's not gonna work anymore. Like that doesn't work on a guy like me. So Natalie gets shoved into this vehicle that a lot of Crossbones guys are in, and Crossbones drops a grenade in there, and so luckily, just Natasha was able to get out of there in time, and so Crossbones gets back into this in this vehicle and goes and tries to shoot down Cap to uh, kind of knock him out of some building. And so that leads to both Captain America and Crossbones having this big fight. So eventually, Cap is to send Sam on a mission because it seems that Crossbones is really just delaying or just being a decoy for four guys to all go out and try to separate to uh, eventually have one of these people have the payload, and meaning the actual biohazard thing. And so Sam is to supposedly uh, find the payload, and so Sam goes and kind of like checks that there's four different targets, and so eventually we have it to where Natasha eventually finds it, but Falcon helps her with Red Wing, and so when Nat finds it, and luckily she grabs onto it because eventually they're worried about having this thing drop, and then Natalie catches it before it is to drop onto the ground, and all is to be saved. And funny enough, like like Sam is wanting Natasha to pet it or kiss it or whatever, like the Red Wing, and Natasha's gonna be doing none of that because I guess it's bizarrely Sam's almost pet. Um, and so now Captain America or Cap and Crossbones are fighting it out, and so Crossbones wants to cut Cap because, of course, technically Captain America had dropped a building on him in the Winter Soldier, and so, but eventually that is to lead to Rumlow talking about the last time that he had saw Bucky and had mentioned that the last things that supposedly Bucky had said is, when you gotta go, you gotta go. And so all of a sudden, Crossbones is to decide to self detonate himself, and so what ends up happening is Wanda tries to push Crossbones into the air, but what ends up happening instead is Wanda ends up accidentally pushing Crossbones into a building, which kind of explodes and kills some people in this building. Which basically after that, Wanda is to basically be banished from ever going anywhere whatsoever ever again. Especially within this film, it's hey Wanda, when you were basically in prison with your brother before, how about you just go back to that? Until you can get your powers under control, especially with her eventually going into WandaVision, that is one way to finally rein in her powers. I honestly wish, why didn't they just send Wanda immediately out to Doctor Strange to have Doctor Strange kind of rein in Wanda? You would have thought that would have been the quickest, immediate thing to do, but they didn't. So, if anything, again, that is to transition us to a time period of a Stark family Christmas. And this is to have been a memory of Tony when he was a young Tony Stark. And so, and we also have the other current Tony Stark, who is just kind of talking about this memory and talking about this acronym that is to be BARF, that eventually might be familiar in some movie that might have Samuel Jackson in it in another movie Marvel franchise somewhere. Maybe it'll have also a guy who used to be Bubble Boy. I don't know. Maybe could that even be a thing? I don't know. But anyways, so you know what I'm talking about immediately. Like a lot of people are just like, "Oh, that's that movie." And I'm like, "Yeah, I know." Like I'm going through the old movies, and so now looking at it, and I know like what is to eventually come up. Um, and I'm gonna like just be like, "Hey guys, remember this point when it also reflects this other film that I know exists, but we'll get there." But anything, so Tony used to mention that this thing is BARF, a bizarre acronym that he's working on. But evidently he had this to be like a therapeutic experience kind of thing. And uh, what ends up happening is Tony is in this auditorium or whatever. And so he is to mention to all of these college students that they are to get uh, like all grants. Every single bit of their college is to be paid out into like basically anybody who's to go to college. It seems like Tony is forking over the dough for that. So all of a sudden, Tony is to read this teleprompter, and like after he has had this memory of supposedly his last time being with his mother and father during some Christmas time where Howard is giving like Tony crap, but like Tony's mother is telling Tony, it's like, hey, like just tell him that you love him. Like just tell him that you uh like just tell him something. And so Tony just says like, I love you, Dad. And then like he just kind of just like, because but yeah, so eventually Tony is to start to go through the teleprompter and eventually notice that like there's like a thing for Pepper to be here, and Tony needs to improvise this speech or improvise what he's going to say next. And so eventually when he is to be done with his whole speech, he heads back into the back where all of a sudden there's a teacher that is to be asking like, hey, this grant, like, would that work for teachers too? Like, if they are to go back to school? And Tony's like, well, whatever. So, uh, so Tony's assistant is apologizing for the fact that Pepper had to cancel for this, and bizarrely they couldn't correct it last minute, like his speech, and so uh, going on, Tony is to make it into an elevator to all of a sudden be talking side by side with a mother who had lost a child. So this is Miss Spencer. I didn't go into IMDb and check out what her actual name was, but I'm not going to take the time. I'm not. So reasonably, like Tony is all of a sudden talking to this woman while almost sharing an elevator or whichever, and so this woman is to mention that she is to have a son named Charlie Spencer who had died because of Sokovia, and uh, and like she is to mention like his like backstory and stuff like that, which eventually Tony Stark eventually goes into showcasing the full-on backstory of this character somewhere later in this film when they are to start debating things. Uh, so really with that, that transitions us again uh, to a completely different scene where Captain America is watching TV. Wow, what an exciting part! I don't know how many times people are going to be watching TV, especially in this film. So Captain America is watching TV, and it is to remind him about Legos and funny enough, also, if you guys go and watch Wolverine Origins, uh, Lagos is also in that movie. Just so so there's technically been twice now that there has been a Marvel film that involved Nigeria in that same place, which is Lagos. So it's kind of weird how twice now that has happened, but it is what it is. I guess maybe they're just certain film shots or certain film locations that people would probably just go into to just easily be able to film any number of things. So, but anyways, Captain America is to watch what is to have happened in Nigeria, the recapping of it on TV. And so Captain is to decide to go and speak with Wanda about what had happened. And really, Wanda is like, man, I can't believe what I accidentally did. And Captain America eventually talks to Wanda and mentions about we just need to save as many lives as we can, because maybe no one gets to be saved next time. So eventually, Vision interrupts these two, and Wanda is telling Vision, it's like, Vision, you need to use the door. And Vision's like, oh, I'm sorry, but Captain America, you wanted to be aware of when Tony Stark was to arrive. And Captain America is like, oh, okay, great. And Vision is to mention that he is to have a special guest with him. And of course, they're like, oh, well, who's the guest? And it's to be the Secretary of State, which is, of course, General Thunderbolt Ross. So, Ross is to go on to have this grand old speech about how many times that the Avengers have consistently saved the world and kicked names and take butts, or taken names and kicked butts. Good God, I almost pulled a Guardians of the Galaxy moment there. And so Thunderbolt Ross is mentioning how the Avengers have such an unpayable debt to the government and everything like that. But also, General Thunderbolt Ross also considers every single one of these superheroes to also be dangerous. That eventually, Ross makes the consensus that really a lot of times these people keep things unchecked, reasonably. How where the heck is Thor or Hulk right now? Perfect question. And so Ross says it's well, if I don't know where Thor and Hulk are, man, that's basically you don't see me just kind of just going hey man, I know I have nuclear weapons somewhere, but man, I just can't quite find them. You don't have that situation going on with Thunderbolt Ross, so I guess you shouldn't have that going on with reasonably Avengers. But here's the thing, you can't control Thor because Thor could be any number of places at one time. Thor could be in Asgard, or Thor could be in Muspelheim, or or Vanaheim, or London, or 85 other different places. like you can't control Doctor Strange because he's in the Sanctum Sanctorium, and like he will not be like he won't give a crap what anyone is to say. But anyways, so eventually Ross is to start giving these people footage, reminding them about all the stuff that had happened, whether it had been in New York, Washington D.C., Sokovia, Lagos, and so all of this destruction, all of this damage, had decided, or had the UN decide that they want to put up the Sokovia Accords. That instead of having the Avengers like being like a freelance thing that they can do their own missions whenever they want to, and that like no one will tell them any different, they have to do these accords so that way these superheroes will be a supervised Avengers. That eventually there's going to be this like committee of people that are going to tell the Avengers exactly what to do and what not to do. So if the Avengers say like, "Hey man, I need to go to stop Bucky," more than likely those people will just say, like, I don't think that you should stop Bucky because if anything, like you have been like compromised by being involved with Bucky. So I think we're gonna send somebody else to go and retrieve him. And so really out of that, that pushes kind of the Avengers to just be like, yeah, I don't know about that because maybe they're eventually going to not have us do specific missions that I think that we would be perfect for, and a lot of people are probably going to get hurt in the process by having people be sent out to a mission that they are outmatched to do, and so like that's kind of where they're at. So we transition. This is hilarious. We transition to Cleveland. So we are to see a man who is to have a car accident outside a man's home, and that is to lead to eventually having this man coming into another man's home and basically drowned him because this is Baron Zemo and he wants to get all this information on not only like retrieving the Red Book, but Baron Zemo wants a report of a mission, like a mission report from 1991, and so we have this colonel that has all this stuff, the Red Book and all these things, and so this guy is going to forcibly drown himself so Baron Zemo won't be getting any information. And so that pushes Zemo to just be like, well, okay, like, alright, so I guess I'm gonna get nothing out of this guy. I guess I just figure out if there's another person that I can go and find this information from, which is going to have to be Bucky eventually when he is to ask him, when eventually that will happen soon. So we cue back to the Avengers, and now they are starting to debate the whole Sokovia Acts. We have Rhodes, who is kind of like dancing in between two things, and Sam is to call him out on that, where Rhodes is kind of mentioning like the accolades of Thunderbolt Ross, and and so Sam is kind of course like just like, man, I don't want anything to do with the Accords. And so really, like, there's a lot of people that are just kind of asking like, well, hey, like, what is going to happen if we don't sign these? It's like, well, you'll have to retire. Like, you'll have to stop being a superhero, or you'll get arrested because you're doing your thing uh, like in an outlaw like manner against the Accords. And it's like, well, like you're only gonna arrest me if I'm caught. So that's that whole kind of thing. So, anyways, so everyone is starting to like get their debate on. Like Vision is like doing all this like this roundabout way of like talking about his approach of this whole debate and kind of like having an escalation of things that are all to connect together, and it's so weird. But then Stark is to mention again about the full life story of Charles Spencer, like I guess from birth to him dying in Sokovia because they had dropped a building on him while they were kicking butt. So, uh, but Rhodes is reminding people that the United Nations had called for this, that there had been a ton of people that all wanted this to be put together, and like they have to recognize that like there's a lot more people than what's within this room right now that all want these Avengers to bend to this accord. Like there's a whole United Nations of people that are all making this decision for these people, and so they should hear these people out. And so while Cap is to like go on and on and on about this debate, all of a sudden he is to get a text mentioning that sadly enough Agent Carter had died in her sleep. So now Captain America is to go to Agent Carter's funeral. And so and I'm like, man, this is happening like really quickly. Like we just find out maybe Cap found out too late and maybe he found out just as the funeral was happening. But man, in like the Winter Soldier, when Cap is to see Peggy or uh to see Carter, like how it seems like she was kind of fading in that part of this movie or in that movie. Now like going here, now she's dead in this movie, sadly. Anyways, so eventually we are to see Agent 13, who is Sharon Carter, come up and do a speech and like mention how like to any number of people like she was the founder of Shield and any number of things, but to Sharon Carter like Peggy Carter was just her Aunt Peggy. That's all she really knew her for. But eventually it gets down to the nitty gritty of this movie where the main thing to get out of this is that at one point Peggy had mentioned that sometimes when the world is to tell you to move, you maybe sometimes need to plant yourself like a tree and say no. And so that was the real thing that like stuck with me throughout this movie. So after this whole funeral service, both Natasha and Cap are having a moment together, and really like Natasha was just there to like basically have Cap have someone to lean on. And but also like Cap is to get like a briefing of what had happened while like he basically left. And supposedly Tony Rhodes, Vision have signed Bart Clinton or Clint Barton, Hawkeye. He's retired. Uh, Wanda is to be held up um, because like she's to be determined. Like if anything, she's kind of on the fence. Plus, also I think like she's going to be like she's going to be stowed away anyways. So it doesn't really matter what side she's on because she won't be on the field, seemingly. Because that's what their plan is, to basically just put her back in a cell just like when she was with her brother. So, uh, Cap is telling Natasha that he can't sign the Accords. Um, and so that just pushes us on to eventually. Now we transition yet again. So after this whole funeral is over and Natalie's to comfort Cap, uh, really we push on to Vienna, where uh, eventually we have to go and cover the King T'Chaka moments. So the chords have all gotten together and have like signed this whole thing, and so now they're doing a press conference to do it. Natasha is to talk to T'Challa, and I'm like, God, like T'Challa looks so interesting in this movie, and then eventually once he like, it seems like he looks a little bit different in this movie than Black Panther, but I'm not quite sure. Like, but it was so weird looking at like T'Challa in this movie, and plus also his outfit. Eventually, when he is to eventually be Black Panther. So, uh, so Natasha is to talk to T'Challa, and then like King T'Chaka is to go and talk with Natasha. But then both like father and son have this like talking together. And so we immediately have T'Chaka that goes up and he has this speech about these accords. And T'Challa is kind of watching on as he is to see a person kind of messing with something outside of the building. And T'Challa is to see that someone had planted a bomb. And so T'Challa had gone and grabbed his father to try to protect him, but sadly enough, King T'Chaka had died. So, uh, that transitions us uh, to, I think, yeah, like we transition to eventually have Sharon and Cap kind of talking to one another, and eventually they are to get onto an elevator. And so Cap is to talk to Sharon and ask her like, well, when you were spying in me in the Winter Soldier movie, like, did Peggy know about that? And Sharon is like, no, like I didn't want her to know about it because I didn't want her to lie if she was to ever meet you again. So both Sharon and Cap go up to a room, and Sam is to like tell them what's going on in the TV. That like there was a whole bombing situation going on, and that the Winter Soldier had been spotted, and so like that transitions us to again. So T'Challa and Natasha are talking to one another, and like Natasha is just like, okay, like T'Challa, I get it. Like your dad is dead, and like there could be a bunch of things like rattling around in that brain of yours, but like nothing is going to bring your father back. So T'Challa mentions that uh, his people are to have told him that dead is not really the end, that there's this thing called the Green Velt that is to like have the dead kind of like walk around there forever. And eventually, when we go into the Black Panther movie, we can eventually see T'Challa eventually re-meeting back up with his father and having a talk. And so, but eventually, this goes to have T'Challa, who is to mention that eventually he will kill the Winter Soldier, and like he will go after Bucky. So Natasha is to eventually make it back to Captain America and talk about the Winter Soldier. Uh, uh, and that is to push on to eventually have Cap going and talking with Sam, who is to mention like, hey man, like I'm going with you. Like whoever's to shoot at you is to also shoot at me. And so that leaves Sharon to come to the same place where these two are talking. And so Sharon is delivering intel about what she knows about the Winter Soldier. And so that is to lead to us transitioning to Zemo reading off the code words in the red book. And but that also transitions us to see the actual Bucky, the Winter Soldier, in Bucharest. Or Bucharest? Bucharest? I want to say it's Bucharest. I'm hoping I'm pronouncing that correctly. Somebody who is in Bucharest could probably correct me with that pronunciation. I'd appreciate it. So, good God, the transitions. Uh, so Bucky is to eventually go around Bucharest and try to buy some things at stores. Eventually, he is to see a newspaper that is to be covering him. And while he's doing that, Captain America is finding out exactly where Bucky is to live. And so Sam is to be on top of this building and is to just kind of give Cap a heads up uh, when anything is going to happen while Bucky is to make it back to this spot. Uh, Kind of mentioning like a. I'm gonna have to pause here for a second. All right. So Bucky makes it back home, and so Cap is trying to ask Bucky what he remembers or what he knows. And so Bucky is to mention that he knows that Captain America is Steve Rogers because he read about him in the museum. And so but Cap is like, well, do you remember anything more than that? And Bucky is to just be like, not really. And he mentions that he wasn't in Vietnam, um, but like he doesn't remember much besides that. So Sam is to eventually mention to Captain as these two are talking that like guys are coming in to go after both Bucky and Cap, mentioning that they're German special forces, and if anything, Captain America is to warn Bucky about what's going on, and eventually the longer we go about this, the more that like the soldiers are coming off on the roof, and so Sam is mentioning that he's compromised, and so like they'll probably be to Bucky and Cap within seconds. So uh what ends up happening is eventually the German soldiers are to breach are to breach this room. And so Winter Soldier is to go and like break through this floorboard to eventually grab this backpack and chuck it out of the building. Because eventually, Bucky will eventually like slide down this building to get this backpack. And so, but what ends up happening is that both Captain America and Bucky are to go down fighting these German people down this stairwell. And Captain America is to like tell Bucky like do not kill these guys, and Bucky is like I'm not going to. So they fight these guys down the stairwell, and it's a really cool approach to like this whole stairwell of things. Because like eventually like Bucky is to like grab onto a piece of the stairwell like with his metal hand to just kind of like brace himself. And so like there's a lot of cool things going on with this stairwell scene that I'm probably not going to get into because I just probably don't have the time. But anyways, uh eventually we transition to eventually have uh eventually Bucky and T'Challa, who is to show himself. And so now both Bucky and Black Panther now are fighting. And so that leads to eventually have like Bucky trying to get into a helicopter, and I'm no wait no wait. Blah, blah, blah. Sam is in a helicopter, I believe. So I'm like, where is this? Where are we going here? What's going on? Both Black Panther and Bucky are like just sliding down this building, and so Buck and Bucky and Cap eventually are and Black Panther are all like running down this car tunnel. And so that eventually leads to Captain America commandeering a car, and Black Panther has like latched himself on to this vehicle. And Captain America is asking for Sam's help to try to get Black Panther off this vehicle. And Bucky is driving in a motorcycle. And so Sam can't really do anything. And then like Black Panther is to eventually try to make his way to get to Bucky, but eventually what ends up happening is uh, eventually War Machine is to show up and arrest both Captain America, Bucky, T'Challa, and Sam Wilson, just because like War Machine is like, hey, like you guys are now like considering you didn't sign the accords, like you guys are all under arrest. So Black Panther is to take off his helmet to showcase that he's T'Challa, and War Machine is like, oh, like it's good to meet you, King, because of course War Machine hadn't met Black Panther until now, or even T'Challa until now. So we transition, of course, because you're going to hear that a billion times. Vision is trying to cook Wanda food, like something from familiar from her times in when she was home. I don't remember where she was. I want to say it's like Chernobyl. I'm going to say that wrong because I don't remember WandaVision all that good or all that well. I mean, so probably anyone can correct me where like Wanda had spent her time in being, because more likely somebody watched WandaVision. But anyways, so both Wanda and Vision are kind of talking about their powers and how it seems that they don't exactly know like what either one of these things are. Like Vision is kind of mentioning about his mind stone that he doesn't quite understand it, and like Wanda like doesn't really understand her powers. So eventually Wanda is just wanting to decide to go and get some food instead of Vision cooking. And so Wanda wants to try to leave, and Vision prevents her from doing so. And Wanda's like, okay, Vision, why won't you let me leave? And Vision is to mention that Tony Stark does not want Wanda to leave this building. So, guess what happens? Berlin! So, Bucky and T'Challa, Cap, and Sam are all transported to uh, go to their coveted office slash cells because they were supposed to sign the accord and they didn't. We of course have T'Challa, who is threatening uh, either Cap or Bucky, but then we transition to have Agent 13 showcase us Everett Ross, who is of course the guy that we probably know from shows like Fargo or movies like The Hobbit. So, and eventually we'll also know him in Black Panther when eventually review that movie when we ever have time. So, I guess freaking like Black Panther is going to be a big movie that eventually I'll have to get into. That's probably one of the big three I would probably consider. Hence why I waited so long to get to that, because I felt I should also get to this because freaking T'Challa is freaking amazing. And I wanted to get the origin of T'Challa right all up in here, this movie. So, if anything, Everett is to mention to the guys that they are to get a receipt for their Captain America shield and their bizarrish bird costume. So, Everett Ross is to mention that these guys are going to be held in offices, not cells. And so Stark is having a call to Ross, kind of mentioning about some things that he feels are not actually General Ross. It's actually Stark's. Like I think they like talk about the Captain America shield and how technically that's actually Howard Stark's, and so that's technically now Tony Stark. So like Tony Stark can call the shots of where the shield eventually is to head. So now we have Tony and Captain America having to like talk about signing the accords again. Here's an interesting tidbit. Robert Downey Jr. was actually saying that Civil War was actually his favorite film to do, just because he actually really loved doing things with Chris Evans. And so, really, this movie felt like they were doing that a lot. And so, really, he loved the whole approach of this movie. And, like, I guess this might be his favorite film to have done. So, like, that's just a little interesting tidbit. You can probably find that on his Joe Rogan interview when he is to just kind of talk about some Iron Man stuff, but mostly just kind of go into like UFC fighting or just karate or stuff that he had done at some point. So, but anything, Tony fished something out from his father's archives. He went and he found uh, some old pens uh, that is supposedly supposed to mean like some kind of olive branch that Tony is to give to Steve, just kind of saying like, "Hey, like these pens have a significant historical value, and so like I wanted to showcase them off here because they are important." And so immediately Cap to ask Tony, it's like, hey, you know what? Like, I haven't seen like Pepper around here. And so now Tony has to like break down uh like all that had happened. Like basically like Captain or Iron Man, Tony Stark now has to break down every single one of the Iron Man movies up until this point, and also mentioned that like he just got to a point where he didn't want to stop being Iron Man. Like it got to the point where he destroyed all of his other versions of himself, because this I guess is after Iron Man 3, and because heck if my memory is all that great. And so both Tony and Pepper are on a break right now, and so because just Tony just didn't want to stop being Iron Man, even though he could have had technically Jarvis be Iron Man, or there could have been the Iron Legion, which bizarrely they no longer have the Iron Legion anymore. I guess after Age of Ultron, I guess they just abolished that whole thing, as well as Jarvis or anybody else being inside the suit besides Tony. Never made sense to me. Like they could have had like an army of Iron Men going and attacking Thanos, and like what if they like presented like an Iron Man 3 kind of thing going up against Thanos? Man, like Tony could have easily had that Infinity Gauntlet off of Thanos if he brought in like his Iron Army. Could have easily beaten Thanos, but I guess technically uh Tony probably could not have brought his Iron Army to Titans. So yeah, I guess like Thanos would have had to been on Earth, and then like Tony could have brought in his like Iron Army, which he couldn't do that either because Tony was on Titan. So like I guess that ruins that whole thing. But anyways, so like these guys just get into a dialogue about relationships, and like Tony is talking about like, man, I don't get how uh like Howard Stark had a relationship with Tony's mom for so long and all kinds of things. And so Stark tries to demand for Cap to sign the Accords, and what ends up happening is that while Cap is to try to like think about this whole thing, eventually Cap is trying to see who's still on the fence, and so Tony is to ask like, well, hey, like, what about Wanda? Like, I think Wanda is still on the fence, and so Tony is like, well, Wanda is confined, and Cap is like, wow, like you are just convincing me that like you're taking the free will out of any number of these superpowered people. And so, you know what? I'd hate to break up a set, so here's your pen back. I'm not signing because you're going to eventually keep people imprisoned. Like, how is this better than like me not signing? What is the difference? Like, is there a benefit package to this? No, it just feels like you're either going to be imprisoned or you're going to be imprisoned. Like there is no other option besides maybe retirement or whatever. So while this whole conversation is going on and so on and so forth, we transition to have Zemo making his way into Tony's headquarters to eventually go and say some magical words to Bucky to get him to talk about the mission report from 1991. So eventually, Sharon, Sam, and Cap are to eventually watch on as Bucky is to be supposedly with this therapist or this psychiatrist. And so bizarrely, that's when Falcon gets the receipt for his bird costume, and Falcon's like, "Bird costume, really?" So like they couldn't figure out what to call it, so they just called it that. So if anything, like these three guys all figure out that it's kind of weird how quickly like Bucky's picture was to be tossed out into the news. It seemed that Bucky had to forcibly be framed for him to be like found. Like they wanted to try to like figure out where Bucky was anyways, and so they had to frame him for this incident for a lot of people to go out of their way to find Bucky. So, uh, so Bucky escapes, and so Cap is to grab onto Zemo and try to squeeze him for information. But that just leads to Captain and Sam and Winter Soldier like fighting it out. So Ross is kind of asking if Natasha is to ask Tony about like, hey, like you do have like a suit with you, right? Like you can get suited up, right? And Tony's like, yeah, the only suit that I have is the one that I have right on right now. Because what ends up happening is all that Tony has is just his like Iron Man like countermeasure, which he had in Iron Man 3, which Tony goes to Bucky and is to turn on his Iron Man fist and like do this pulse like thing that is to kind of knock Bucky down, but eventually like Tony still doesn't have his full on suit here. So eventually like Natasha is to try to fight the Winter Soldier, and Natasha is like wait, you can't even like recognize me, you can't even like remember me from whenever, like come on, like it's nice to get noticed. So but this eventually leads to like Sharon try to take Bucky out, but she quickly gets taken out. T'Challa tries to come in there and fight Bucky yet again, and so eventually that leads to like both T'Challa and Bucky. Like Bucky eventually makes it to the roof and is to go into a helicopter, and now Captain America now has to hold this helicopter from lifting off, and so he's like holding on to it. So Bucky purposely crashes the helicopter to try to kill Captain America, and Captain America just easily gets out of the way. So the helicopter is to fall, and so, or the, moving on. So the next thing that we are to see is to have like Zemo, who had gotten away, and he is just listening to a message that his wife is to leave him. Coincidentally, we'll find out that eventually this is a fairly old message that eventually this guy is to consistently listen to. So, but if anything, Zemo is on a plane to Moscow because he is to eventually hear what the Winter Soldier had asked for, and so the Winter Soldier had mentioned mentioned to Zemo about Siberia and how like they had plenty of other Winter Soldiers there besides Bucky. So that leads to eventually having Bucky being trapped in some machine, and all of a sudden Bucky is to remember everything now, every bit of his past. So And so that leads us to eventually also Captain wanting to get to know about Siberia. So evidently there was other Winter Soldiers at this Siberia place, and eventually Bucky had to fight some of them. And eventually, I guess the other Winter Soldiers eventually got and went rogue and started to fight all of these people off. So one of the guardsmen like tried to use Bucky as a human shield, and so like that's the whole scene of that. So uh eventually Tony is to again talk to Stark or Tony. Blech. Tony is to again talk to Ross, and then also like Tony is to talk to Natasha and ask, it's like, man, like it would be great if we could have like a Hulk right now. Like, Natasha, do you think that's a possibility? And Natasha's like, no, because he's in Thor Ragnarok, so I don't think that's gonna happen. So like they're really talking about possible people that they can pull to help them like try to get into the try to like like be able to get through this mission. And so that is when Tony is to transition to Queens to find Peter Parker. So Peter is to make it home, and both Aunt May and Tony Stark are to be in the living room. So Tony Stark is to try to figure out a way to kind of lie and mention that him and Peter have consistently emailed or exchanged things back and forth, talking about a grant and all kinds of things. And Peter Parker is like, well, like that doesn't mean that means that eventually I will be getting like paid, right, for a certain kind of like studies that I'll be doing, Tony Stark. And like Tony's like, well, yeah, anything is possible. And so that really just means that like Tony immediately is to know that Peter is Spider-Man, and like Peter is just like, well, hey, like will I be paid being Spider-Man? And Tony's like, well, like if anything, we'll work something out. Like talking about the grant as basically a way of like figuring out how to kind of while Aunt May is to be there to kind of conveniently like kind of talk about like being a superhero without actually saying anything. So pushing on. So uh, eventually Tony is to go inside Peter's room and to realize that he's a dumpster diver. And eventually, I think when Tony is to start working with Peter, eventually that's probably going to change. So really, of course, like that's when Tony is to have a number of footage of Spider-Man being Spider-Man, and so Tony is just to outright ask Peter Parker, like, "Hey, that's you, right?" Like all like, man, like this is impressive. There's a ton of weight that you had to move there. Man, that's really great. So Stark is asking what exact like name Peter is to have, like Spiderling or whatever bizarre like name. And Peter is like, well, yeah, I'm Spider Man. So eventually, Tony is to find that Peter Parker is to have some attic that is to pop out this suit. And Stark is just like, okay, this is like a bizarre onesie and whatever. Um, but anyways, like Tony's to also talk about Peter Parker's webbing and also like how exactly he got all of his other powers. And so Peter Parker's to mention that's a very long story. And also like Tony is to look through like the goggles of this mask and be like, how can you even see through these? And Peter is like, well, like I can see really well through those. If anything, like all of my senses are all dialed up to 11. Like this one goes to 11, and also Tony is to ask like Peter eventually, like, well, hey, like, why do you even do this? And we have like Peter who's kind of tossing out this kind of like story of that like he is to like with great power with comes great responsibility kind of speech in a roundabout way. So Tony is to ask Peter if he has a passport because they're going to be heading to Germany, and Peter is like, well, I have homework, and Tony Stark is like, I think you're making up stuff. So that transitions us to eventually having Wanda and Vision who are back at their place. So Vision is to see that there is to be some bomb out in the distance, and Vision is just kind of like, well, maybe I should go out there and see what the heck that is. So all of a sudden, Wanda is to see Clint Barton at her place, and so Barton is convinced Wanda to like go with him to like hey man, like it's either you're gonna like stay here and like live your days without using one lick of your power, and that's fine and dandy and all, but like come with me and like you can do something. Like I think the reason why they put these two together is just because of Age of Ultron, where Wanda didn't want to use her powers before, but Barton is like, well, hey, like I'm fighting robots with a bow and arrow. None of this makes sense, but like, hey, like if anything, like once you get out that door, you're an Avenger, and so like I think Bart is to be there to remind Wanda the fact is that she's still an Avenger and that she still has some work to do. So, if anything, Vision is to come back, just be like, "Hey, Barton, what are you doing here?" Barton is to try to take out Vision, but eventually Vision is like, Barton, you're not going to be able to take me out. You're not going to take me down. And Barton is like, well, no, I know I'm not going to be able to take you down. Like, that's what Wanda is for. So Wanda uses her magic to kind of subdue Vision. But of course, she's not going to kill him off because that would seem like crazy. So, uh, now we like transition to another moment where Natasha is again talking to T'Challa. Because good God, how many times do we have to have this in this movie? But then eventually that transitions to us to eventually have Sharon, Cap, Bucky, and Falcon all together. Because eventually we have it where Sharon and Captain are trying to get, I think, the shield from like Tony's people, and also Sharon and Cap are to kiss, and Cap is to mention that that was like late, and we have Bucky, we have Falcon who are just kind of like little kids, where Falcon or Bucky is telling Falcon, "Hey, can you push your seat up?" And Falcon is like, "No." It's like, God, you're such a piece of crap. So, but that transitions us to have Cap going and meeting uh, with Barton, who is to or Clinton, Hawkeye, who is to give us Ant-Man and like kind of give us a heads up of like, hey, WandaVision or Wanda's with us now. And so eventually Ant-Man is to like show himself, and he's going to need a little bit of coffee, but like he's here. And so Ant-Man is like, oh my God, Captain America. Oh my God, hey, Sam Wilson. And like Falcon calls like Ant-Man Tic Tac, and that like that'll never happen again, and like that was an audition but it'll never happen again kind of thing. So so that has us go and have uh uh both Tony and War Machine going to this airport, and now we're really gonna start having things get really freaking confusing. And I'm gonna have to probably pause here for a second. So, what ends up happening is, of course, we have Tony and War Machine talking to Cap and Ant-Man and all the other guys. So they're talking about, of course, like basically like Captain America and all the other guys are working against Tony, like hey, you're gonna get arrested. So Black Panther is to show up, basically wanting to like he's gonna go for Bucky again for the 80th time in this movie, and so that leads to have like Stark, Cap, and Black Widow like all having this conversation with one another, and like Tony is just like, God, this is leading to nowhere. So hey, Underoos, like go and just take the shield from Captain America. So Spider-Man just appears and takes the shield from Captain America, webs his hands up so that way, like, I guess he's seemingly cuffed. Um, but anyways, uh, Tony is to go and have a sensor to see who's all there, and they are to find that Bucky is in some hangar bay, and so they're like, okay, like we're going after him. So, anyways, so we push on to have uh, Cap and Black Panther and like fighting it out, and Ant-Man and Natasha are fighting it out, and so Spider-Man is eventually going and finding both Sam or Falcon and Bucky, and all of a sudden, like Falcon and Bucky are watching on as Spider-Man is to like swing into the like spot, and they're like very confused. And Falcon is like, God, everybody has a gimmick. And so all of a sudden, Spider-Man busts into this spot to grab at Bucky and just like, oh, hey, like metal arm, cool. Um, and so all of a sudden, like Spider-Man is trying to fight with Falcon and telling him he has a right to remain silent. And so also War Machine and Cap are fighting it out. Uh, Stark and Hawkeye and Wanda are like fighting it out. Just consistently, everything is just another fight or whatever. Uh, Spider-Man, Bucky, and Sam. We have a moment where Falcon gets webbed. Uh, Bucky is to get webbed, but eventually Spider-Man goes flying off because Falcon is to send Red Wing to like zip Spider-Man out, and so Bucky's asking why didn't Falcon think of that in the first place. So Falcon is like, I hate you. So if anything, Ant-Man uses his power to take a small like action figure size truck to make a giant truck, but what ends up happening is that they explode this truck and it almost hits like War Machine, and Ant-Man was like, oh my god, like I didn't think that that was like a gas truck, I just thought that that was a water truck. So uh this all like now pushes together everyone in one fell swoop scene where Vision is to come in with his own little speech. And so that is the land to have forcibly both Hawkeye and Widow fighting one another, and so reasonably, Wanda has to go and take out one or the other because or take out Natasha because Hawkeye is pulling his punches. And so, if anything, let's push on. So, uh, Spider-Man is doing the one thing that kind of bugged me about, of course, the Winter Soldier, and plus, like they use it as a joke in this movie to just say like, "Hey, man, like go for his legs." Finally, they did that, and finally they made a joke about it, and I thought that was hilarious. So, uh, but if anything, what ends up happening is that Hawkeye is to shoot out Ant-Man through this arrow to try to get inside of Tony Stark's armor. And so Ant-Man calls Hawkeye Arrow Guy because he didn't know what his actual name was. So Spider-Man and Captain America are fighting, and so eventually it leads to Spider-Man having some kind of like I think uh like some kind of thing that Spider-Man is to hold up, and Captain America is to ask where Spider-Man is from, and Spider-Man is to say he's from Queens and Captain America is from Brooklyn. So Tony is to be all of a sudden freaking out because eventually someone is talking inside his suit. And so he's like, "Who is this?" And Ant Man is like, "Your conscience. Like, I know we haven't really been talking to one another lately, but like, hey, like, I'm your conscience." So eventually, Friday is to release some uh, thing to push Ant Man from outside of this suit. So eventually, like we start to have where like Captain America is now like starting to desperately ask. It's like, well, hey, like if anything, we need to do something, and we need to do something now. And there are some people that are like, hey, like Cap, like for us to probably be able to lose to win this whole thing, like some people are going to have to lose out of this. Like some people are going to have to take a pretty big hit. And so Ant-Man is to mention that he was able to do this one thing once, and maybe he can do it here, and that is to basically become Giant Man. And so all of a sudden, like Ant Man just becomes Giant Man, and everybody's like, "Whoa!" Like, holy crap! And so Iron Man is now asking, like, to what is to be his team. Like, is anybody else like hiding any like shocking or fantastic ability that like we don't know about till now? And if anything, all of a sudden Hawkeye is to meet with Black Panther, and so and so Hawkeye introduces himself to Black Panther, and Black Panther is like, "I don't care." Like, uh, so if anything, uh, Cap and the Winter Soldier are making their way to escape all this, and Natasha is helping them escape. And so Spider Man comes up with a way to try to take down Giant Man, and that is to be referencing a Star Wars movie. And so they're like, yeah, like this sounds like something that we can do. And so they end up webbing and taking down like Ant Man's legs, and so he ends up smacking onto the ground, and like asking about bizarrely orange slices. And so after and eventually Tony is to go after Spider-Man and telling him he's done for the day and to go off and go back to Aunt May. So War Machine is trying to get to Cap and the Winter Soldier ship, and Falcon is behind War Machine, and so Vision is going and checking on Wanda, and so uh, War Machine is asking for Vision to help him out, take out Falcon, and eventually Vision is to accidentally hit War Machine instead, forcing War Machine to have his entire like machine just like fall apart and fall out of the sky. And so Tony is to rush after War Machine and eventually check on his vitals, and supposedly War Machine is still alive. Sam is to come to the fray and say that he's sorry to Tony, and Tony is to hit Sam Wilson to just kind of knock him out. And so uh, Tony is, of course, like crying by his friend getting hurt. So transitioning to eventually Rhodes getting an MRI, and now Stark is asking Vision what had happened, and Vision had mentioned that he was distracted. And so, like, that's really just it of all that. So, Tony and Natasha are having a talk to one another, basically, how, like, Natasha is kind of mentioning that, like some, like, rude things to Tony and vice versa. And so, eventually Tony is to go into his chopper to try to get as much information as he possibly can about Baron Zemo. So Zemo is to eventually go to the spot where all of these other Winter Soldiers were to be, and supposedly he was to get them unthawed, but we'll find out later that he might have had another alternative for that. So Stark is to eventually head to Thunderbolt Ross and eventually head to eventually all of the Avengers that had gotten arrested. And so uh, Hawkeye calls Tony a futurist and like, hey man, look at the futurist. And so Tony is just like, man, like Hawkeye, you made a huge mistake. If anything, like if anything, maybe you should like grow up. Like if anything, you have a wife and kids, and you should be a grown up, but actually you're just not. Like, kind of really ridiculing Hawkeye and all kinds of goofy stuff. So, if anything, Tony is to eventually pass by the cell of Ant Man, and I thought bizarrely Ant Man was gonna get a house arrest, but maybe like I guess not. So, but Ant Man is to mention that Hank Pym had told him to never trust a Stark, and Tony's like, "And who are you?" uh, but if anything, uh, Falcon and Tony are having this conversation, and Tony is to mention that he had made a mistake and that he needs to talk to Falcon about uh, where Cap is, and then eventually they're gonna have some alone time, so that way they can like figure this whole thing out. So Falcon is to say, well, if you're gonna go where Captain America is, you're gonna have to come there as a friend. Like you're gonna have to put all this crap that you have aside to just come there as like a friend of Captain America. And so Tony's like, okay, great. So as Tony is to leave, Tony is to talk to Ross, and is to mention it's like, hey man, like I can't wait till our next phone conversation because I can't wait to put you on hold. Like I love to watch the little thing beep as I'm putting you on hold. So Tony is to go into his copter or his helicopter, and so that is when, of course, Tony transitions into the Iron Man suit, and we find out that the Black Panther is consistently following Iron Man wherever he is to go. So, Cap and Winter Soldier are at Siberia, or the spot where this whole thing was to go down. So, eventually Tony is to meet these guys there and call Bucky a Manchurian candidate. And so Stark is to mention that he is not going to go out of his way to arrest himself. And so, like, he's there as a friend and he's there to help them out, like, whatever they need. Um, but if, anyways, once they go further on into this place where supposedly all the Winter Soldiers are to be, Zemo is to eventually go onto this intercom and mention that every single one of these Winter Soldiers have all died in their sleep because Zemo did not want to have another one of Bucky out there somewhere in the ether. So, Zemo is talking to Captain America almost kind of like face to face, and Zemo is to mention that now that he is so close to Captain America, he realizes what his real true eye color is. And eventually, Zemo is to play to Tony Stark the death of his father and his mother, and to showcase that the Winter Soldier had been a part of that. So, really, when Captain America is to watch on as Tony is just be like, oh my god, like I remember that street, I remember where this was. So immediately Tony is to go to Captain America and ask, like, did you know? Like, did you like? And so Captain is like, well, I knew about it, but like I didn't know it was Buck. And so now Iron Man is going to definitely go and fight both Bucky and Captain America. And so we get to this point where eventually, like, there's this whole like rung of things where eventually, like, Iron Man is to eventually use the ability of flight and also like lose the ability to have like a targeting system. So eventually Iron Man is to try to like suffocate Bucky and ask him like, hey, do you remember my father? Do you remember killing my family? And Bucky's to remember that he, or is to tell Tony that he remembers them all. He remembers killing everyone. uh and so Captain America is to just say, it's like, well, hey, like, you killing Bucky won't bring your parents back. And Tony's like, he killed my mom, like I don't care. And so eventually it just ends up where both Bucky and Captain America are having to like just basically double team Iron Man, just try to take him down as quickly as possible. Tony is to rip off, of course, Winter Soldier's arm, and uh, and of course, Zemo is now off, like outside of this whole facility, listening to this message yet again, to eventually have T'Challa enter there and to enter with his claws out. So, if anything, Zemo is to talk to T'Challa and mention that the Avengers had killed his family, that eventually he had gone home one day and realized that his family had been murdered, and that like the Avengers had was just able to just walk away like murderers of basically his family. So T'Challa is talking about vengeance and how basically like Zemo wanted to have the Avengers tear themselves apart instead of him like trying to do and take them down. There was no way for him to be able to do that. So he masterfully crafted a way for them to do that themselves. So T'Challa is talking about vengeance and how he feels that he was probably going to go out of his way to kill Zemo after this whole thing was to happen. But really, now talking to Zemo, T'Challa realizes that his time for vengeance is now over, and Zemo is going to try to put a bullet to his head, but T'Challa stops him from doing that, and it's just like, no, like you're going to spend the rest of your days in prison for what you did. So, uh, if anything, now, since Tony doesn't have a good like a targeting system, Tony is now having to forcibly fight Cap hand to hand, and Friday is to mention to Tony, it's like, dude, you're not going to beat him hand to hand. There's no way that this is going to work out. But eventually, Friday is going to put together like countermeasures, and Tony is like, great, now we're gonna kick his butt. So, uh, if anything, Stark gives Captain America a final warning after he starts like beating the crap out of him, and Captain America is, of course, it's like, well, I can do this all day. Like, come on, like, let's go. Like, and so even though Cap looks again exhausted, so uh, what ends up happening is that Captain America is to eventually take Stark and to try to consistently try to kill Stark's power, hitting him in the chest piece. Like we have Bucky trying to do the exact same thing, where Bucky was trying to rip the chest piece from out of Iron Man's armor. So like they kept trying to figure out a way to kill Tony's like power, and eventually they succeed in that. Um, and eventually, like they crush in half Tony's uh, chess piece, and so both Bucky and Captain America are to walk off, and Stark is to mention to Captain America, it's like that shield that doesn't belong to you. That's my father's shield, and so like that's mine. That's not yours. And so Cap decides to drop the shield, and so like Tony just wanted one small little victory. If he wasn't going to win this, he still wanted to figure out a way to just like take something away from Captain America. And so that shield was it. Like you can say like eventually a lot of this stuff just starts to become a little bit of petty, but like still like a win is a win in some way or another. Just taking somebody's best weapon away from them is like a win anyways. So Tony is to eventually go back to try to make Rhodes' recovery the best it can possibly be. And so, like, Tony is just kind of like consistently at every step of Rhodes trying to make his recovery back. And Rhodes is just kind of mentioning that anytime he was to go out and do things for the military, like, like he knew that eventually there might be like consequences from going out there and doing any number of those missions, but like this just really sucks like that this had to happen to him. So all of a sudden there's a mailman who is delivering a letter to Tony Stank, and Rhodes is like, yep, Stank right here. Like party 5 for Stank. Like, man, I'm never gonna let that go. So Tony is to find out that this thing is a letter from Tony Stark, who's to like basically give like Tony this love letter saying that like, hey man, like I get what is to have all like transpired, but if anything, like if you ever need me, I will be there for you. Yeah, like a lot of people got hurt on both sides of things, but uh but yeah, I think that's also when Cap is to give Tony his like cell phone, or maybe like was there a part where Tony was to get Tony Stark's cell phone like before in Infinity War? Like, did that happen here? Because like I didn't remember seeing that in this film. Like, but anyways, so Captain America is to go on to break out Falcon and all the guys out of prison, and uh, then there's two end credit scenes that are to happen at the end of this movie. One is to see Bucky to be kind of uh, like put to sleep, like kind of like how he was frozen until they can come up with answers of how to cure Bucky of this whole mind control thing in Wakanda. And so Captain America is talking about like, well, like I don't know if like Ross and all of them are gonna come after us here in Wakanda, and T'Challa's like let them come, like let them try to get in here. They're not gonna get very far. So like, and that's also showing, I guess, that eventually this is going to lead us to Black Panther next. So the other end credit scene is that Peter Parker is to get like bruises all over his face, and Aunt May is like, "Hey, so you got beat up by some bully? Like, who was he?" And so Peter Parker is like, "Some guy named Steve. He's from Brooklyn." And so like Aunt May is like, oh, "Okay, all right, well." So Aunt May is to eventually leave, and bizarrely, like Peter Parker is playing around with his new web shooter, and the web shooter is to kind of show like this like Spider-Man design, and that's really just the end of this movie. So I'm gonna get out of here because I was probably supposed to finish this up way quicker. This was an enjoyable movie. Recapping this now, summarizing it, it was an enjoyable movie, but also there was a lot of dialogue. There was a lot of transitions going on here. I probably quickly covered stuff, but I probably didn't cover the dialogue because there's way too much crap to go into. There might have been stuff that I might have said was a thing of dialogue, and it might not have been that. It might have been a fight or whatever. There's a lot of crap to pull through this film, and I'm happy that I now have this done. It's now finished, even though it probably took 2 hours, and this movie is in 2 hours and 30 minutes. But I'm gonna get the heck out of here. Thank you guys for watching this review. If you watched the whole thing, because really a lot of these is just me recapping the movie, and a lot of times a lot of people would just probably watch the first 5 minutes of this or 10 minutes of this, or I'm just going into just my consensus of whatever this is, and then that's probably it. But with that said, I'm probably going to go through a lot of other Marvel films at the end of all this. And so, like, this is just like, oh, thank God this one's done. So eventually I can get into other things. So with that said, I'm going to get the heck out of here. Bye, everybody. Bye, everybody.